Good evening. Can you remember the last time? You remember the last time that somebody did something and you had no idea who they were, but you thought, what a lesson that I learned today. Are we paying attention to what's going on around us and how people serve and just plain old good things that people do? I think in here, we all know each other. And so when we do the good things that we do, people know us by name. And that's a good thing. Now, I don't know if you've thought about this much, but in the Bible, there are many people that we read about that provide us very good lessons, and yet we don't know who they are. We don't have a name for them. We don't have a bloodline for them. We may not even know where they lived, what status they may have had in society. Married or single, children or no children. Oftentimes we read about people in the Bible and we have no clue as to what their names are. But yet God used very average people, some with names that He didn't provide us with, to teach us lessons. And so I would encourage you tonight as we go through this lesson and even afterwards, be paying attention to different things that are happening within our community. Sometimes when I see a good lesson, and it may just be somebody that's praying at a restaurant with their family, I'll make it a point to walk up to whoever was leading that prayer and I will say, it's a beautiful thing that you're praying with your family this evening. I really appreciate what you're doing. I have no idea who they are, but they were a lesson to everybody around them and anybody who was paying attention. And so because they are unknown to me, I want them to know, yeah, I don't know your name, but I saw you. And thank you for being an example. So pay attention to that a little bit more as we're out in the community this week. Keep an eye on things that are going on. And although you may not know their name, it's okay to tell them thank you for the lesson that they've shown us. John chapter 9, you've heard me talk about him last week. A couple of stories. The last time that I preached a week and a half ago, I used a few of these stories, but in a different context. And we read about the blind man in John chapter 9, beginning there in verse 1. It says, Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And Jesus answered and said, Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground, and he made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. Verse 7, And he said to him, Go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Verse 8 says, Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, Is not this he who sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. He said, I am he. It's interesting that here we have a man who's been blind from birth. We don't know his name. We don't know his age. Don't know much about him other than he's blind and some other people know him. But God, Jesus comes across him. Jesus heals him, spits on the ground, covers his eyes. But then this is what's interesting. Jesus tells him, you need to go wash. He gave him instructions, and he was willing to follow those instructions. In other words, he had faith. Probably didn't deserve to see again. That was by God's grace that he gave that to him. But what's really interesting is as soon as something good happened, people started to question it. Right? Man's been blind forever. I don't want to imagine he looks any different other than maybe he's got his eyes wide open now. But as soon as people saw that he was cured from his blindness, the chatter started. Let's question. Let's doubt. Oh, no, it's not that person. It's somebody else that looks like him. Even gossip, it kind of seems like, is going. And he has to stay there and tell them, it's me. Y'all are questioning who this is and saying, no, it's somebody else. But I'm telling you, it's me. Baldo, you've seen me 3 times a week, 2 times a week for the last 15 years. And I have to come and explain to Baldo, it's me. But I can see now. This is what's going on. These are the common people that are around him pretty regularly. In verse 13, it says, "Then they brought him, who formerly was blind, to the Pharisees. Now it was a Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also asked him again how he had received his sight. He said to them, He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees said, This man is not from God, because he does not keep the Sabbath. Others said, How can a man who is a sinner do such things? And there was a division among them. So not only are his friends who were commonly around him starting to chatter, but now you have the Jewish leaders are starting to chatter as well. And they're frustrated and upset because Jesus has healed this man on the Sabbath. So a great miracle has taken place, and yet it seems as if nobody's satisfied. Then his parents answered and said to them in verse 20, We know that this is our son, and that he was born blind, but by what means he now sees we do not know, or who opened his eyes we don't know. He is of age, ask him, he will speak for himself. And this is the reason the parents really didn't want to get involved. His parents said these things because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if anyone confessed that he was the Christ, he would be put out of the synagogue. Friends around him all day long are questioning. Jewish leaders have the chatter going because Jesus healed on the Sabbath. And the parents are just flat out saying, we don't want to get involved. You want to ask? Ask him. But this is what I wanted to get to. Verse 25. The blind man answered, the blind man who can now see answered and said, Whether he is a sinner or not, I do not know. One thing I know, that I was blind, and now I see. Everybody had chatter going on around him. He'd been blind since he's been born, and we don't know if he's 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. We have no idea how old he is. But all of a sudden, he can see. And everybody's got something to say about it. And when they put him to the test, and they finally asked him, How is it that this happened? Who is this that did this? He says, I don't have an answer for you. Whether that man is a sinner or not, I don't have the answer for it. But what I do know is, I was blind, and now I can see. Up there in bold and in blue and in caps, you see. As Christians, we need to appreciate what we have. We need to appreciate what it is that God has done for us. There's going to be chatter. There's going to be buzz. There's going to be people that will persecute us and talk badly about us. We may lose family members, or our parents or our siblings may deny us, much like the parents here really didn't want to get involved. We have friends that will talk of us because we look differently than what we used to. Or we just approach life differently. We have different commitments in the way we do things. And yes, sometimes you may hear from me, or you may hear from an elder or somebody else and may be questioning why certain things are happening within your life. That chatter at times can be discouraging. But much like the blind man, don't forget how much we have through Jesus Christ. Appreciate what it is that you have. We get to another person who we really don't know much about. In Luke chapter 21, verses 1 through 4, there's a widow and 2 coins. And 21:1 reads, And he looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the treasury. And he saw also a certain poor widow putting in 2 mites. So he said, truly I say to you that this poor widow has put in more than all. For all these out of their abundance have put in offerings for God. But she out of her poverty put in all the livelihood that she had. We think about that as people are given an offering. The apostles are watching, and Jesus spots the one lady that has 2 mites and puts in. And I heard somebody talk about this the other day, and the gentleman said this about it. He said, you know, that was an embarrassment. It was an embarrassment that a grown woman would put in 2 coins, and that's all. But I want you to think about that. If you and I are sitting in the pews, and you got 15 people putting in a 20, a 50, a 100, and all of a sudden somebody walks up and puts in $1. Are we going to appreciate what that one person gave on that $1? Are we going to start to question, that person's in their 50s. Why are they only giving $1? Are our hearts right? So the apostles were probably thinking, wow, look at what they're putting in. Wow, look at what that guy just put in. Whoa, look at what that person just gave. 2 mites. 2 coins. How embarrassing. That person would only put 2 coins in. You think back to the parable of the talents, Matthew 25 and verse 24, it said, then he that had received the 1 talent came and said, Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And we know what the man with 1 talent did. He was scared that he would have to speak to the Lord. He was scared that he would have to come back and give an account for that money. And so he didn't want to lose it, so he took that 1 talent and he buried it. And that's what he gave back. And sometimes that's how we think about things when we see somebody who gives little, but quite the opposite. Rather, she is more like the person who had 5 talents. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. You see, the widow that only gave 2 coins is much like the man who had the 5 talents. What God had blessed them with abundantly, each at their different levels, they both committed themselves to making a profit for God. Or they both committed their hearts to do it as much as they could with what it was that God had given them. And so I believe the lady, even though she only gave 2 coins, was going to be blessed much like the person who gave the 5 talents. Doesn't look like anybody who received the 1 talent and buried it. It's what we choose to do with what we've been blessed with. The second point tonight is give what you have. It belongs to God anyway. She gave all she had, and she had tunnel vision of what needed to be done. Have we ever been influenced by those things around us or people around us on how we're going to give or how we're going to serve? I love the fact that the widow with 2 mites, all that she had tunnel vision, and all she could think about and all that she wanted to do was to give it for the purpose of God. What great faith. What a great attitude. What trust that she had in God. What faith to know if she gave it all, the Lord was going to provide, and she would have something to eat tomorrow. She would have a roof over her head. She would have clothes to put on her body. A great example, but definitely not an embarrassment. Give what you have. Belongs to God anyway. Then we read of the sinful woman who washes Jesus' feet with oil in Luke chapter 7. Luke 7, verses 36 and 37, the sinful woman who washes Jesus' feet with oil. Actually with her tears, but anoints his feet. It says, one of the Pharisees asked him to eat with them. And he went to the Pharisee's house and sat down to eat. And behold, a woman in the city who was a sinner, when she knew that Jesus sat at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of fragrant oil, and stood at his feet behind him, weeping. And she began to wash his feet with tears, her tears. And she wiped them with the hair of her head. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with the fragrant oil. Now when the Pharisees who had invited him saw this, he spoke to himself, saying, "This man, if he were a prophet, would know who and what manner of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner." In verse 45, Jesus had asked Simon some questions about who it was that was forgiven. He that gave the most gave the least. And Simon answered, and this is what he responds to Simon. That Simon, when I came into your house, says, you gave me no kiss. But this woman is not to cease to kiss my feet since the time I came in. You did not anoint my head with oil, but this woman has anointed my feet with fragrant oil. And it says that the smell of the oil went throughout the area that they were in. And so Jesus is invited to eat with the Pharisee. A Pharisee invites him to eat with him. And you have the sinful woman who's waiting for her opportunity. Describes her as a sinner. No name, just sinner. And when Jesus sat, she brought the oil, stood behind him, weeping, crying, heartbroken because of her sin. So much so that she was able to wash his feet with her tears. And she continuously kissed his feet from the moment that she walked in. And then she washed or anointed them with the fragrant oil. And for the Christian, the man who knows God, and I hope we never find ourselves on this side of things. I hope that I never hear God say, BC, you gave me no kiss. You never kissed my feet once, and yet this sinner continued to kiss my feet. And you never anointed me with the best of what you had. But she took that fragrant oil, that expensive oil, and she anointed my feet. And so the third point we have this evening from a person with no name in the Bible is, give your best to the best. When I take a look at where we are today, we've had some people that have left us. But I walk out and I look at the offering. We're about $1,400 different than what we were last week. That's how much we fell short of last week's offering. And probably the last 5 to 6 months. Offering's been pretty good. But we're about $1,400 short of where we were last week. And I can't say that ties into this completely, but what I will say is this, is whatever our best is, let's make sure that we give for the best, that we honor God with it. And that's not just finances, right? I mean, I think every one of us should set aside what we know in advance, right? Come Monday, I should already know what I'm giving Sunday. Whatever I've been blessed with the week before, that check should be written out, or that money should be set aside. Right? There is no flipping through the wallet to see what I've got that day. Put that, right? I mean, we give of our heart. Sometimes we're a little bit shorter than what we are, and that's okay. Maybe we weren't blessed as much that week as we were the week before, and that's okay. We give from our heart. With a joyful heart, we give. But we give. Right? We give. There's no reason for anybody who's got blessings, who's been blessed, who has a job, there is no reason for anyone not to be giving. I think back to Melchizedek. And Abraham being God's chosen vessel, God tells Abraham, look, I'm going to make you the father. Everybody after you, your children, right? Us, that's who are going to be God's people. And yet when he ran into Melchizedek, already knowing that God had chosen him, Abraham gave to Melchizedek. Why? Because he was both king and Lord, is what the Bible says. Abraham knew he was an example of Christ. And Abraham could have taken all that plunder from the people they had just conquered. Could have taken it all, but when he saw Melchizedek and he recognized that he was a man like Jesus, he gave it to him. Because of what God has done for us and because of who God is, there should be no doubt about us giving our best for the best. That's a little bit on finances. What about our talents? How are we using our talents? The best of who we are. The best of what God has given us to use, to serve. How are we using that to serve God? And I tell you what, I'm going to be very honest with everybody right here tonight. I am frustrated with myself. Kerry worked really hard in what he did here. Excellent teaching. Try to get us to buy in and to see different things. And I use the excuse of my job to stay away from knocking on doors, stay away from writing cards, to stay away from showing up at different preachings that we had here. I was always tied up in my job in that. I'm not saying I didn't do other things. I used my talents when I could, but could I have done more? And the answer to that is yes, I could have done more. And so now I sit in this position that he had, and I recognize that I should have been doing more all along. That it would have made his job a little bit easier. That it would have made Bill and Baldwin's job a little bit easier when they were serving as elders. And I'm not saying I've got that great of a talent. That's not what I'm saying. But just in what I do have, if I'd have given my best to serve the best, that would have been a little bit less work that everybody else around here would have had to have done. What do you do well? What do you do naturally? What have you not challenged yourself to do? Because if we don't challenge ourselves, we can't be the best. Only God will make us the best. But we got to step out of our comfort zone and we got to challenge. We got to step out of our comfort zone. We got to give. We got to step out of our comfort zone and see a bigger picture. Not for us, for God's glory. Give your best to the best. Then we read of the paralytic man in Mark chapter 2, verse 1 reads, "And again he entered Capernaum after some days, and it was heard that he was in the house. Immediately many gathered together, so that there was no longer room to receive them, not even near the door, and he preached the word to them. Then they came to him, bringing a paralytic who was carried by 4 men. And when they could not come near him because of the crowd." Now let me stop there. So imagine that you have this man who cannot walk. And they've heard what Jesus has done. And these friends, whether they be friends or whether just good people, they wanted to help out. And here's the thing. One person I'm talking about is the paralytic man. However, we got a total of 5 people that we don't know their names. We got 5 unknown people that have come together, 4 that have come together to decide to get this man before Jesus because of what Jesus is doing. I don't know if any of you have ever tried to move a mattress out of a house. They're tall, they're heavy. Do I hold it? Do I pinch it? Do I squeeze it? How, who's walking backwards? Who's walking forward? There's a lot that goes on there. It's got to be really well coordinated, because if you don't, you're going to trip and fall, maybe bust open the wall. All kinds of stuff that goes along with that. But imagine a man that's probably 150 pounds of dead weight, and you're putting them on a blanket, and 4 people have got to pick up each corner and pull their equal weight with the same steps to get him. What distance, we don't know. But they brought him to where Jesus was. And they got there. When they got there, they saw that it was full, to where they couldn't even get in the door. How many of us would have set the blanket down and gave each other a high five and said, "We tried. Great job." How many of us would have stopped right there and say, "Hey, we got him to the door. It wasn't because we lacked trying. We really worked hard today to get him there." And we go home and we're feeling good about ourselves. Yeah? Ever done anything like that? Let's keep reading, because that's not what he did. Verse 4. Then they could not come near him because of the crowd. They uncovered the roof where he was. So not only was it a difficult enough task to get him to the front door from whatever difference they come, walking in all the same cord, lifting in the same weight, but now they've got to get him up on a roof. Oh, go get the scaffold, go get the ladder, right? Yeah, probably not existing. No scaffold, no ladder. Now they've got to get him up on the roof, and the four men coordinate, and they work, and you got one man sitting in that blanket who is trusting on those four. One, that they're not going to drop him and hurt him, and two, that they're going to find a way to get him before Jesus. So they're on the roof. So when they had broken through, they let down the bed on which the paralytic was lying. When Jesus saw their faith, I'm going to stop right there. So the four men walk him. They don't stop at the front porch and go home and celebrate because they tried and they got him far enough. I said, no, we're going to go through the roof. They break in the roof. They've got the man. They lower him before Christ. And that's it. The four men are done. We don't hear anything else about them. They did all that work, and Jesus praised them for their faith, and that is all we know about them. They can't do anything else. But Jesus does. Jesus, in recognizing their faith and knowing that the faith of that man must be so strong, says to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven you." A lot of us like to have that glory, that praise, that pat on the back that we did a good job. Maybe even a little trophy or some certificate to place on the wall. These men didn't do that. They got him before Jesus. Jesus said, "Appreciate your faith. Your faith is so strong." And then Jesus took it from there. The lesson from this story is, help who you can, how you can. Help who you can, how you can. That doesn't mean you got to give them $100. That doesn't mean you got to give them your car. That doesn't mean you got to give them a place to stay in your house for free. Sometimes it's just a smile that you share with them. Sometimes Kelly is just sitting down and having a cup of coffee. That's it. Don't really have to say a lot about problems that are happening in our lives, but sometimes it's just about having the presence of another Christian right in front of you. These cards have gone a long way. When we're starting to see from this card writing ministry that we have, they've gone a long way to really touch people's hearts. They really have. I'm surprised at the feedback that we are getting from these cards. It's something that simple. Here's something that's kind of hard for you men, because you hear me say this to you occasionally. Bill, I love you. And then I watch the look on people's faces. Sometimes they don't know how to handle that. Right? Especially men. Tough. Brother, I love you. And you just watch, and they're like, I love you too? They're not sure what to say. But you know, I got to hear that some days. I need to know that somebody loves me. Even when I don't deserve it, they're going to tell me they love me. What can we give? Help people how you can. Doesn't have to be anything big. We just got to be willing to serve people. And every one of you can do that somehow. Some of you bake really well. Send somebody a cupcake, or bring them a cupcake. Give them a little flower. Bring them a sticker. Young kiddos, stickers are really nice. I have a Bible that's full of stickers at home still. What can we do to help others? It doesn't have to be anything special. It just has to come from the heart. And in wrapping this up, the boy and his lunch. We read of a young boy, and yet we don't know his name. John chapter 6, verses 5 through 10. Probably not his lunch, but I wrote it that way anyway. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread that these may eat?" But this he said to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may have a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a lad here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many?" Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000, not including women and children. About 5,000. Then Jesus said, "Make the people sit down." Now there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, he said to the disciples, "Gather up the fragments that remain, so that nothing is lost." 5,000 plus. And it was getting late. And he knew they were going to be hungry. Going to be too far for them to journey. And he tested the disciples and says, "What will we do?" Philip's focused on the money, saying, "We can spend this much money, we're still not going to feed them." The other one says, "This young boy has some fish and some bread." And Jesus says, "Bring him to me." And they wonder, what's he going to do with this? But you see, Jesus already knew what he was going to do. He already knew how he's going to multiply it. Now here's the thing. Why did he take the fish and the bread from the young boy? Why didn't he just do what he needed to do? I think there's a lesson in that for us. Encourage our young people to serve. And let them appreciate that they've done something good. They're going to serve the way they can, from where they are, from what they have. We need to be able to recognize that and really appreciate it and build them up in that. Second part of it is Jesus wants us to understand that we need to use what it is that we have, much like the point that I just gave with you a while ago. Whatever it is that you have, use it. I got a couple of fishing rods. I like to take people fishing with me. We're going to be out there 3 or 4 hours, maybe longer, Travis. And we're on the boat. We're going to have some good conversations. I like to get together with some men and have breakfast every once in a while. Some good conversations that take place there. And when I've done the barbecues there at the house for some of the men, I don't have fancy sides and fancy plates. It's the pit's open, grab what you want off of the pit and gnaw on it and you'll be good. Use what you have to serve God. Now I talked about lessons that we have from unknown people. But I want to change it just a little bit as we wrap up here. I want to call it standards that were set by unknown people who wanted to serve and get to know God. Standard number 1 is appreciate what you have. And we see that from the blind man who had all the chatter going on around him when a good thing happened and even his family turned on him. And he said, "I don't know whether that man's a sinner or not. What I do know is I was blind, but now I see." His standard was, I'm going to appreciate whatever it is that God gives me. Standard number 2, give what you have. And understand this, it's enough. If you don't have much and you give it, it's enough. If you have a lot and you give enough, it's enough. It's what's in your heart and it's what you've been blessed with. Give what you have. The lady with the 2 coins gave all that she had, trusting, having faith, not worried about tomorrow. She gave all that she had. Give your best for the best. Have you made up your mind for that? You know, we built our house a few years ago. I wanted an open concept, and although my house is not very big, if you walk in there, within the dining area and the living area, we can probably fit about 12 to 15 people in there comfortably to be able to have discussions, have a conversation, have a game night. But that was intentional when we built that. I told Barb, I want to be able to host people and to celebrate with people. I want to be able to have this open concept. It's not a huge house, but with what I've got, we can make do. It's God's house. I'm going to use it to serve Him. My talents, I'm still working on those. But I need to work on them. Because I want my talents to be the best they can be. And I challenge myself daily so that God will continue to make my talents even better. Because not only am I serving God with my talents, but I want to serve you. And I want to serve the community with the talents that I've been blessed with. Now, what that looks like in the end, I have no idea. I'm sure God does. But what I know is I'm going to continue to build on those talents every single day so that I can serve God with those talents. I said enough about finances already. Help who you can, how you can. Is it enough to get somebody to the door and stop? If we bring them to the feet of Jesus, to teach them the Word, and help them to understand salvation and what they need Jesus Christ in their life, that may be enough, because somebody else may water. Right? But we can't get halfway there and stop and be satisfied. We've got to pull through. We've got to finish the job. Everybody has some way that they can serve. Help those that you can, how you can. Use what you have.
You see, I think you need to be very careful when you talk about standards by unknown people. Church has standards.
Right.
And they're being set by the Lord.
Right.
And even in the church right now, there's